Welcome back to Balanced Beings Uncut, where we talk about health, wellness, and everything in between. Today, I've got one of our amazing naturopaths joining us, Bonny. Thank you so much for coming on board.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yay! So I wanted to get all our naturopaths on board so you can learn a bit more about them and their journey as well. So Bonny, take us through a bit more about what you treat in the clinic, what you see a lot of, and a bit more about you and what got you into the field.
Yeah, so usually in clinic at the moment, I'm seeing about 80% children. I'll see about 15% women and 5% men.
Yep.
So usually with the women and men, we're treating like hormonal issues, fertility, also some mental health type pictures is what we're seeing for the adults. In children, we're treating a range of different things. So I usually see a lot of skin-based eczema patients, ADHD, like speech delays, recurrent ear infections, a lot of constipation too.
Yes, that's very common.
Yeah, so seeing a lot of that in clinic.
Awesome. And what do you find is the common things that help the most with the children you see with the speech delays or the anxiety or immunity?
Yeah, so the main things that I always find is usually I like to start with the gut depending on their case history and their symptom presentation, but usually we're looking at the gut and we always almost see low secretory IgA levels, even low pH, they're not breaking down their foods properly, uptaking nutrients, so there's a big nutritional deficiency type picture there as well. Gut inflammation. We'll also have a look and see, usually with mood behaviors in children, is a heavy metal type exposure, as well as nutritional deficiencies in that hair testing.
Yeah, I definitely find that with kids that have got anxiety or emotional dysregulation, which is the main topic we're going to talk about in the podcast today, is I find that a lot of times it is nutrient deficiencies or inflammation or bacteria in the stomach impacting that neurotransmitter synthesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the main kind of types of heavy metals that you find that are impacting that anxiety and mood, would you say?
I'd say copper's a big one, high copper, aluminium. I see a lot of lead as well.
Yes, lead is way more common, and like it's the fact that it's in chocolate as well. There's a big exposure. Cadmium and lead is in chocolate, which a lot of kids are having, which does build up that picture as well.
Yeah, and then the more sugar that they're having, the more inflammation that they get in the gut, and their ability, they can't process and eliminate the heavy metals that they do have, or like genetic components, like impacting their ability to detoxify them.
Definitely, and I find that when we see a lot of kids with anxiety and emotional dysregulation, I've not yet done a test in the clinic that's come back negative for MTHFR for kids that have got anxiety.
Yeah.
And that's because of that methylation cycle really impacts our neurotransmitter synthesis.
Absolutely.
Which impacts our happiness.
Yeah.
And our ability to regulate our moods and tantrums and whatnot as well.
Yeah. That's something I find is a big one too, is so not only do we have like nutritional deficiencies based on our diet, so the food that we're eating now is nutrient deplete, and then we're not consuming enough of those foods that we need, and then we're having like genetic polymorphisms that have a higher need for nutrient requirements, which they're already lacking in.
Exactly.
So it's definitely a big component, I think.
Definitely, because if you even think about our fish, a lot of our fish is getting farmed now, which means it's not getting the types of food it would normally eat, the fish, which then it's depleted, and then we're eating foods that are depleted. Even our soil is, I think the rate 70% of soil in Australia is depleted from magnesium.
Yeah.
So even the foods that are high in magnesium aren't high enough for us. And then we have a genetic component such as MTHFR gene, which continues to get passed down. Higher risk if you've got a family history, that increases those nutrient needs, which means we're definitely not getting the needs that we need through our foods.
Yeah, it's really hard in modern day time. I was actually listening to an audiobook the other day, and it said that we need to eat about 8 oranges to get the same nutritional requirements of 1 orange in the past due to those soil depletions.
Yeah.
So even if we're eating the best quality diet, we're still not reaching those nutrient targets that we need.
100%, and even in regards to our food that we are eating, we then have pesticides that are sprayed. The pesticides that are sprayed contain heavy metals, like copper, and so then they're producing and worsening that anxiety response in children too. And then if we think about our body trying to detoxify these, we need high amounts of nutrients to do that, like B12 and magnesium and vitamin C and zinc.
Yeah.
So it's like a catch 2022 with what we're eating every single day.
Absolutely. And it can become that little bit of a vicious cycle in terms of like figuring out where to start, when to start. And that's why I think like doing those tests is so important. Definitely. So we can just like tick one thing off the box. Okay, we know that you have higher needs for B vitamins, and start working on those small things which make a big overall difference systemically.
Yeah, definitely. It's like just building those blocks and doing those simple little things make a big difference in the long term, because you're not contributing to worsening the effect essentially.
Yeah.
The main deficiencies I've seen is B12, folate, zinc, vitamin D, omega-3s, magnesium. They're the deficiencies I find that cause anxiety and emotional dysregulation in children if we think about nutrient deficiencies on their own.
Yeah.
Magnesium and B12 are a big one, and folate, because they impact methylation cycles, so we need them in increased amounts. If we've got that MTHFR gene defect, which about 40% of children do, even a higher amount of people if we're looking at the children that are actually anxious. So they're not getting those needs they need through food, and then they need more in that cycle. That's contributing to the anxiety. There's been studies that have shown that 1 in 3 people that have depression and anxiety are folate deficient as well. So it goes to show that this gene really, really impacts the needs that we have, and if you're not getting those needs, it impacts your body's ability to regulate your mood through those neurotransmitters.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the methylation cycle, the methylation pathway is responsible for many biochemical reactions, and that's why it's such a big key player, and it can impact almost every single area of our life.
Yeah, and our bodies, It impacts everything. And I think that it's definitely under-recognised, and a lot of people don't treat that area or even test for it, which it becomes tricky, especially in children. So making sure we're getting those tests done so that we're not missing anything as well. Like a MTHFR buccal swab's only about, I think, $90 max. So it's not super expensive to do, and it gives us so much indication on what's going on in the body.
Non-invasive. It's really easy to test children that way as well.
So it's a buccal swab, so it's in the mouth, so it's not super hard to do. And then obviously if we're thinking about nutrient deficiencies, we can see a lot of these nutrient deficiencies in our hair test. So a tablespoon of hair for a child, and you can see a lot of their markers. There is some markers you won't see, like vitamin D or B12, because they're more reliable in blood. So you will need to get a blood test if you want to test those for children. Like if we have a client that comes back with positive for MTHFR child, then we will indicate going to get homocysteine and B12 and folate tested, because it is worth it. Just a sidetrack for everyone, a tip that I give is if you are getting a blood test for your kid and they're under the age of 4, then what I recommend doing is actually calling up in areas near you and seeing if there's a pathology clinic that's attached to a hospital, because the people that are trained in the hospital, a lot of them have to take kids' bloods every day because the kids are sick, to check on their results and whatnot. So I find that they're really, really good at taking kids' blood. So personally, I go to Robina Hospital because they've got a patient pathology clinic that anyone can go to. It's publicly accessible, and then they're the ones that also go and do bloods in the hospital for children.
Yeah, I agree. That's been my experience. My daughter, the hospital are much better with her, and I think from like a parental side of things is just being confident with the kids. It's going to be a little bit of sting, and I think if you're overly worried and anxious about this test and giving off that vibe, then the children pick up on it as well. So just letting them feel safe and secure with what you're saying to them, rather than being a bit like, oh no, I have to do the test and this and that. Kids pick up on so many different things. So I think just being strong and confident, it'll be over soon, and go get a treat, a toy, have a little special moment one-on-one is really good.
Definitely. I think that making it a whole fun, exciting day makes a world of a difference. That's what I've done with my kids, and they've never been scared of bloods. I myself am very scared, but I've never shown that.
Same. It's just why I'm saying, just to try and be confident and strong.
Definitely. And like I always do blood tests with my kids at the same time. So they watch me get it done, and how I react and whatnot, and they see that it's fine. And I just say it's like a little pinch, and then I give them like a little pinch and say that's how it's going to feel. And then that's all the end of the conversation. Do that special date with them afterwards. Like we go do like a baby tuno date. And honestly, I've been fine. Indiana got a blood test at the age of 18 months old.
Wow.
So she so she's always been fine as well. And she never cried even at that age.
That's
never had
good.
to be pinned down or anything.
Yeah,
they just
that's
held
really
her hand
good.
like this,
Yeah.
and held her hand and like cuddled it, which makes a massive difference, because a lot of times if your kid is acting up and they have to get the blood, they'll pin them down, which is then going to create that negative association as well.
More trauma.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
remembering what's going on 100%.
there. Have you seen many kids with anxiety that are positive for the MTHFR gene in the clinic?
Yeah.
As well? Yeah.
Pretty much all of the testing, all of the indications that we do the MTHFR, they're always coming back positive. So that's like based on that clinical picture, it's justified to go to the MTHFR, and they almost always come back positive. And I think it can seem a little bit scary for parents when they hear that like gene mutation word. So it's not like that. It's very common. Like you said, up to 40% of children have the MTHFR.
Yeah, yep, definitely. It can happen a lot. And when you see clients that come in with anxiety, is your first thought MTHFR, or is there microbiome, whatnot, that you also think about? Like, what do you think you go to first?
Well, really it depends on their case history and their symptom picture as to where I go, but all three of those are things that I think about first. Most commonly, I start to look at the gut initially, because if that gut function or that gut lining's not working properly, then they're not going to uptake nutrients from their diet, nutritional deficiencies. So usually, you know, pretty standard for naturopaths, all health begins in the gut.
Yep.
That's where we go. And then once we work on the gut for a little bit, then we start to pull in these other pieces of the puzzle together: heavy metals, nutritional deficiencies, and also doing the MTHFR in the early days as well, I think is important.
Definitely. And I think that another key important factor that Bonny just said is we can go and do an MTHFR gene test, and we can go and give your child some B vitamins and some folate or some magnesium, or support detoxification pathways, which a lot of times we need with methylation to support anxiety in children. But if we're not actually checking that we're absorbing these nutrients, which a lot of kids aren't, then we're not going to be getting anywhere by doing that. We need to actually see if we're absorbing it. And so when we think about that gut lining, we need to make sure we're absorbing it. And things like antibiotics. What else do you find for kids that like sugar intake, a lot of inflammatory gluten, they all impact and damage that stomach lining. So a lot of kids do have that damage there. Unfortunately, I see it more often than I don't see it, the leaky gut picture.
Oh, absolutely. You'd be surprised how many children are having had, you know, they're 4 years old and they've already had over 6 courses of antibiotics. That's reoccurring constantly through that. And just going back to the nutritional deficiencies and that gut function, like zinc's a big one in like cognitive function, mood, behavior, anxiety. But zinc's also required in the pathway that we need to make hydrochloric acid in our gut. So if we're zinc deficient, then we can't actually make enough stomach acid that we need to break down foods and nutrients from foods to make good neurotransmitters. So this is why it's that continuous cycle, and these small little things like nutritional deficiencies have a big impact.
Definitely. And the other factor that causes anxiety in kids essentially is neurotransmitters. So the reason we always come back to neurotransmitters is because melatonin and dopamine and everything that makes us happy and all that perfect synergistic balance comes from neurotransmitters. And when we think about where neurotransmitters come from, they are produced by either good bacteria and also synthesized by nutrients.
Yeah.
So again, that comes back to absorbing the nutrients in the gut and the good bacteria in the stomach. But we can't put that good bacteria in a lot of the time straight away because they're filled with parasites or harmful bacteria. So if we did that, they would just poo out the good probiotics because there's only so much room to in the stomach for it to go. So sometimes you've got to kill off first. That's why stomach is always key, even with anxiety. MTHFR, again, there's a lot of times we'll treat that, and when we treat the MTHFR and those deficiencies, that's when the anxiety essentially goes away. But a lot of times we can't do that until we've addressed the gut.
Yeah, I agree. Plus, we need like dietary intake. So we actually need all of our good microbiome to make neurotransmitters, but we need the building blocks for neurotransmitters, which are amino acids, omega-3 fatty acids, and these are two ones that I find in children's diet are lacking. Like they're not getting enough good fats. They're not eating enough protein. And if we don't have those amino acids that we need to make neurotransmitters, like we've got nothing to build it with. We know that our brain is 60% fatty acids as well. So if we're nutritional deficient, we're going to have like neuroinflammation, mood disorders, and it's all coming together that way.
And even going back to that, there's studies that show that there's an increased risk of autism and ADHD in pregnant women that don't take omega-3s or have enough omega-3s in their diet. And that's because they don't have the types of omega-3s they need to support cognitive and brain functions and all those pathways in the pregnancy for children as well. Just important as babies and children too. And if you are getting omega-3 sources in the diet, remembering that a lot of those bigger source fish or farm fish have higher levels of heavy metals, which are then going to contribute to a child's anxiety and emotional dysregulation. And so what we want to do is we want to think about looking at really safe types of fish that we can look at. So they're always fish that are lower on the food chain, like sardines are super safe and super high in omega-3s. Like, I can't go wrong, and they're so much cheaper as well.
Yeah.
If you're going to get foods like salmon, making sure it's non-farmed, and it's
which is really hard to come by.
And it's
Australia,
so expensive. It's like $30 for one fillet.
I know.
Literally from Flannery's. It's so expensive. I can't do this for
I love salmon, but it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So I'm the same. I'm continuously recommending those lower grade ones. Sardines, they can be nice, like some lemon, and you can it's just an acquired taste. Once children get used to it, they love it.
It's definitely good to start from like 6 months old as well, so they don't I find if you introduce it a bit later, it can be harder. It's easier to introduce to begin with. And another thing is if your child isn't taking enough omega-3s, then I recommend always having some cod liver oil, because it's so high in vitamin D as well. Even half a teaspoon a day is going to get their omega-3 demands that they need, which we have on our online store, or obviously we have some good practitioner grade ones as well that we use in the clinic, because a lot of kids can be quite fussy, and it can be just too much to add in all these changes of dietary wise to start with.
Ideally, it would be good if we could do everything through diet and lifestyle, but I just think what we were talking about earlier, like nutritional depletions, heavy metals in fish, there's always going to be some element of like a maintenance dose type supplement somewhere.
Especially because of the world we live in now, like a lot of kids are more stressed because they're like living in 2 homes, they're not getting what they need, they've got a genetic dysfunction, the soils are depleted. Unfortunately, we just aren't living in the world that really supports what children need anymore either. So I think that there's a lot of times that there is definitely maintenance things, and omega-3s is definitely something I recommend long term. Going back to omega-3s while I'm on the page, a lot of people don't realise that plant sources of omega-3s don't contain active omegas. So your body has actually got to transfer the omegas from ALA to omega-3. So everyone's like, oh, I have a tablespoon of chia seeds and that's enough for my child's intake. But a lot of people don't realise is your kid might not be able to convert ALA to omega-3s at 100%. Some people's conversion is as low as 20% or 15%, which means they're not getting enough omega-3s. They need to have 10 teaspoons of chia seeds to get their needs if that conversion rate is so low. So it's another thing to think about is you always want to look for active forms of omega-3s through fish as well.
I agree, especially because most of the children that we're seeing coming in clinic, they've got
even absorbing
other things going on, like they've got dysbiosis, they've got parasites and bugs, they've got immune dysregulation, so their body's already working really hard to do the things that it's doing, and this is just another like expenditure, so they're probably not going to be doing it as efficiently as they need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I find on the microbiome map that causes and worsens anxiety, but also is kind of like a marker for, again, MTHFR, is high beta-glucuronidase levels. Like I find if there's angry anxiety, I find that a lot of times it's that liver picture. And so when we have a bit of sluggish liver, or our liver's overburdened with toxins, or our body's just not clearing it out properly because we've got something that impacts our detoxification pathways like methylation issues, then I can find that angry type anxiety. So like mix those two symptoms together. High beta-glucuronidase is very common, so that's essentially a pathway of detoxification in the body. When we see that, a lot of times we'll think, oh, does this person have MTHFR? Because that impacts our beta-glucuronidase and methylation and detoxification pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. The body's working extra hard to detoxify because that methylation cycle isn't quite complete because they can't transfer the folate into active folate.
Exactly. So a lot of times if clients are coming in with, and children are coming in with MTHFR, we think about B vitamins, B12, folate, and we want to look at detoxification pathways. What do you do any extra, like support? I already know you do. I'm just asking you to prod you. But detoxification wise, MTHFR, what do you typically use? Like, what are your go-to herbs when helping detoxification pathways?
Dandelion's really good. Curcumin's quite good as well for detoxifying and eliminating, supporting those liver enzymes. I have a mental block right now.
That's all right.
The last herb
I'm
thinking of.
Dandelion root and St. Mary's.
Yes, St. Mary's thistle. Yes, yes.
But dandelion root and turmeric, like Bonny mentioned, are really good because they're not only supporting methylation and detoxification of beta-glucuronidase levels, but what they're also doing is they're supporting heavy metal clearance. So dandelion root and turmeric specifically help to release bile, and bile's been found to clear out heavy metals such as copper. So we always like to use that in like a heavy metal protocol.
Absolutely.
And again, the reason heavy metals impact anxiety in children is because they impact the nutrients to be able to be absorbed and used for neurotransmitter synthesis.
Yeah.
So, for example, high copper levels impact zinc to be able to be used.
Yeah.
So, client might have normal zinc levels. Doesn't mean their body can actually use them because the copper's blocking that side of absorption.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like kind of a lock and key. So like our receptors, you know, like they've got a key lock to go in, and this copper's going into that key site where the zinc needs to go. So it might be floating around, but it can't get into the place that it needs to go to be transferred into the body.
That's really good analogy. I really like that. I've never thought about that before. That's really good. Yeah, 100%. Another thing that I use a lot for beta-glucuronidase levels and the bacteria in the stomach's NAC. You can't go wrong.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, it's good for so many areas, like the breakdown of the biofilms. It's antioxidants, so it's supporting that detoxification, those liver enzyme pathways. It's pretty well tolerated as well.
Pretty good results for MTHFR and methylation support as well. So they're the types of things we look at if high beta-glucuronidase levels is present, which we've seen again on that microbiome map. And then we have MTHFR, which we look at. And then high copper, again, is something that I see with emotional dysregulation and anxiety, but I typically don't see it as anxiety on its own. If I had a client that was coming in with just really bad anxiety, then I would be looking at those dietary factors, obviously, but absorption of nutrients and then MTHFR.
Yeah.
And then, any nutrient deficiencies that might not be to the MTHFR, like omega-3s or vitamin D.
Yeah.
They're the things that we think are anxiety-wise. But if we have someone that's coming with like sleep issues, tantrums, and anxiety, then our first thought would probably be copper. Because we can see that spiral type pictures occurring.
Absolutely. Especially with that sleep picture as well. I think that's where it gives us that indication for that copper levels. So usually we find that they're quite sweaty, they're restless, they never like seem to be fully rested even if they're getting enough sleep.
Yeah, definitely. And I find a lot of times anxiety will onset with medication use. So a child might have ADHD and be on some medication and then anxiety will onset. The reason I find that is because a lot of medications actually deplete your nutrients. So I know B vitamins, magnesium, zinc are depleted from different types of medications that you're on. So remembering that if your kid is on a type of medication, making sure you're replenishing the nutrients that are being lost by that medication use as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we can specifically target as well. There's a lot of research on what nutritional deficiencies are associated with what medication, so we can support you in that guessing game, and that's why it's important to come have a consult. We can fully have a look at the nutrient interactions and then support where needed through diet, lifestyle, medications.
100%. And another thing worth adding is external factors that can cause anxiety for children too. And I always like to look at that first. Is it an internal or external issue? When the onset of anxiety occurred, was it just because medication was started, or was there an external factor like a separation in the family that caused anxiety to onset? So, for example, like when I had Indiana, and we went through a separation when she was 3, she had an onset of anxiety. So what we did is we obviously worked internal to support her with some magnesium and saffron and ginkgo biloba and passion flower. There's amazing herbs that can provide instant symptomatic relief for anxiety, which we're so lucky to have. Well studied, especially passion flower specifically for anxiety too.
Yeah, I passion flower is a favorite herb of mine, but it's beautiful. Like, it really just helps to calm the body down and give that nervous system a rest and a hug so that they can get out of that fight or flight mode. It can be really hard, even as adults, to like switch over to that rest and digest mode, and it's just something nice that we need that like physical support.
Definitely, and L-theanine really helps too. For that relaxation. It's even in drinks these days to help calm down, like calm drinks, which is amazing. But yeah, going back to Indiana, obviously we looked at internal factors because I'm a naturopath, the first thing I'm going to think about, but I knew that was also an external factor because the separation occurred. But if there's a predisposition to anxiety, that can still indicate MTHFR. like being sensitive to external factors, but you still want to make sure you're seeking the right support, like a psychologist. So if you notice that it's an external factor that's onset, I always say psychologist first. Where if you notice that nothing kind of changed and anxiety begun, then it's an internal factor that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the things, like some children are more predisposed to be more anxious, etc., like that. So there's things that we know, like mental health and mood disorders, are genetically passed down from a range of different things. So it might not be something that, like, they're just a bit more sensitive, but we can still do things to help support them biomedically in their body to feel better and have the best, like, outcomes in life.
Exactly. You can always do both and support them in both pathways to make sure internally it's perfect, and then externally doing what you need. But yeah, talking, because I got so much helpful information about going through anxiety with Indiana with a psychologist. So we saw Tiffany Bennett. She's works in Burleigh, and she's an amazing children's-based psychologist only, and actually found that lack of boundaries was a big cause of anxiety in children. And she was explaining the link there. So if children don't know how you're going to react, or you're going to react differently depending on what house they're in, or there's not specific boundaries and you're going to act different, and they don't know how you're going to act, that caused a lot of anxiety in children and not knowing where they're going to be the next day. So what we did is we created a schedule that showed each person's face for different days of the week on a calendar. So she knew where she was going each day. Each night we'd explain where she'd be going and what she'd be doing for that change to make sure that external factor was ticked off. The other things that we did is we had the same boundaries at both houses. So she knows that if she does something wrong, the same outcome's going to be there. Not one person's putting her in a room, but the other person's ignoring what happened and not dealing with that consequence, right?
Yeah.
So I think that making sure your child has good boundaries and that external factor is ticked off is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. Even like routines can be so settling and calming for children, and it gets a little bit mundane sometimes, but when they're continuously having that same routine in life, they feel stable, because there's always external factors out there that something's going to come up, and they might be at kindy and they have fights with their friends, or kids are like that. So having that safety net around them is really important, and sometimes it's only until, like, we've just had some holidays, Christmas period, a lot of the kids are out of their routine, and I'm seeing them in clinic and they're like, their sleep's bad, their anxiety's up, things like that, and that's because those routines and boundaries have been lost. That time. So it's very important.
It's really good to keep those routines in, and even when you're on holidays, having some type of routine that's the same, like you wake up at the same time every day, you do maybe one activity that's the same every day, like we always play sequence together, we always read a book first thing in the morning before making breakfast. Having similar routines every day, that even if it's 30 minutes, that stays the same each day, and telling them what to expect the next day makes a world of difference for anxiety in children. Besides those, the other factor that I found to greatly impact children's anxiety, because anxiety a lot of times comes from the way mum and dad are, is a fast-paced environment. So if you're like, come on, eat your breakfast, we've got to go, just quickly eat as much as you can, or let's go in the car and eat breakfast. That's going to breed anxiety. You're constantly telling them to hurry up, constantly rushing them as well. So I find that's a big trigger too, like reminding mum to not be anxious and not be fast-paced actually helps the children be more relaxed and not be anxious too. Sometimes it can just be the mum or the dad, whoever's the primary person in their lives every day telling them what to do, can cause that.
And I find that's a big key one. Like my daughter, she is more anxious type, and I really see her, like, I think when they're younger and they're really in tune with mum, and sometimes they're looking at mum's face and they're seeing her energy and her movements and expressions, and I think that being fast-paced and on edge, the kids pick up on that, and then they become highly sensitive to like any different changes in your mood and things like that. So making sure that you're regulating yourself and via to regulate your children.
100%. I think that it's a massive trigger, and not to just seek internal support without doing the external support. I think they should be used hand in hand, because then they're not truly treating that picture as well. And even doing like one-on-one time with a child and doing that before bed can make a world of a difference, even to a sleep routine, because they know what to expect. Like if their nighttime routine's always changing, it's going to cause anxiety around going to sleep. So always keeping it the same. So we always do a game, and then we do 2 books, and we brush our teeth, and then we go to bed and we read our 2 lullabies, and then mum leaves after 4 minutes of being in bed.
Yeah.
And that's always the same every night.
Yeah.
So there's no anxiety or fear around sleep because it stays consistent and they know what to expect.
Yeah, I agree. I find that my children do really good on a similar bedtime. We also have like music that we play there. It's always the same music, it never changes. But for them, it's just that like, okay, this is sleep time, and it switches them off. It's familiar to them.
And it's also been found that what you do every night, if you do it consistently at the same time, it actually helps to produce melatonin because your body knows, okay, I'm going to bed in 30 minutes because this song is playing.
Yes.
It actually produces melatonin and helps your child sleep better. So routines are key, and I definitely think that everyone's getting more relaxed with everything these days, whereas we used to have so many routines as a kid growing up. When I was a routine, it was everything that's the same. Go home, watch TV, eat my jam toast, hang out with my friends, go have dinner, play a game with my parents, read a book and go to bed. Like it was the same thing.
And it felt like so long between like 3 o'clock and bedtime. 7 o'clock was such a long time. But now as a parent and I'm like cooking, cleaning, doing whatever, playing outside, it goes really quickly. But I feel like it's when you look back, you can see how it was just like, it just made you feel calm and stable because it's the same thing coming. You're not guessing, what am I going to be doing this afternoon or what's happening?
100%. So I definitely think that, focusing on you is a definitely big tip. If I was to take any other tips away from today, it would be for anxiety in children, specifically cod liver oil, or making sure they're having enough omega-3s and low on the food chain fish.
Yeah.
Making sure that they're having organic food where possible, so they're not having that pesticide spray that impacts copper and anxiety and sleep with kids. Having a water tank that actually removes copper as well, and you know it does. Looking at getting a microbiome tested so they're actually absorbing nutrients. We know that they are, because you can go give your kids a multivitamin with some B's and folate and whatnot, but if they're not actually absorbing it, it's not going to go anywhere. What other tips would you give?
I'd be looking at that, but having a look at MTHFR, because if you're just going to go get a multivitamin off the shelf that's not active B's or something, it could be actually more harmful to the system. So we really need to kind of figure out what we're doing before we get into just like supplementing everything wise. And also our liver, even though it's natural, still has to process everything. If they've got some high beta-glucuronidase levels, we're actually doing more harm than good by not testing first and seeing where we're going for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Another one is dietary wise, making sure that we're intaking proteins, fats, as well as supplementing them. Having a look at those micronutrients. Zinc is another key player, anxiety in children. Letting kids be kids, having some time to play, not rushing them around, taking them everywhere that we need to go.
Yep, definitely. And going back to zinc, pepitas are such a good one. You can just grind up and put into their meals. I think it's a couple of teaspoons a day gets the whole zinc requirements needed. Otherwise, the big sources for zinc is oysters and seafood, which can sometimes be a bit harder for kids to get in. The other one that I was going to add is pre and probiotic foods, because our neurotransmitters are synthesized that neurotransmitters. So the good bacteria in our stomach help support neurotransmitter synthesis, which impacts our moods. So if we're having pre and probiotic foods, it's still going to help with your kids' mood regulation, anxiety.
Absolutely.
Especially because if they've got that room for that good bacteria to go, it'll help with absorption. If you're giving it every day, it's going to make a consistent difference. So some things that I think about is like onion and garlic and oats, and having even soy milk is a good oligosaccharide prebiotic. And then if we think about like some good quality Koyo coconut yogurt can be helpful, or some coconut water kefir and stuff like that.
Different fibres as well.
Kombucha.
Banana fibre is pretty good if you want to add that into different
Green
things.
banana powder as well. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, cool. Which you can get from Woolworths. It's actually really cheap, and you can use it. Like when I make pancakes, I do some green banana powder. And then I do some like buckwheat flour, half a teaspoon of bicarb soda, some eggs and bananas, and then my kids love the pancakes and they make them so fluffy, and I'm getting prebiotics in there, and top it with some coconut yogurt and they're getting a probiotic, so they're getting everything they need from that meal, and good quality protein with the eggs as well.
Yeah.
Go.
Oh no, these are these little things, and these are these changes that are going to set up that really robust microbiome for continuous lifelong health as well.
Yep.
So it's not these short-term treatments. We really want to try and bring these long-term things into.
And what you do every day and what your child eats every day, it may be small, but it makes a massive difference long term. Looking at some pesticide free if you can, nuts and seeds as well, because they are lower obviously our soils are lower in magnesium these days, but they're still going to be a high source of magnesium in leafy greens. Nuts and seeds I find quite easy to get in kids if you grind them up and you can pop them in and you think, oh, my kids just eat them straight.
Yeah, my kids love nuts too.
Yeah, it's so helpful.
Yeah.
They've got some good quality zinc in there too. But going back to you, if it's no more things you want to add in regards to anxiety, I feel like we've talked about all the topics and factors and triggers now. But I wanted to ask you, what made you want to study naturopathy?
So I guess I've always had like an interest in biochemistry, nutrition and health. And I was doing my hairdressing for so long, but I just had this like deeper wanting to make people feel better.
That's
like,
so cool.
Yeah, so I would have people come in and they're looking really nice, but they're still tired and they're depleted. And I just had this calling for so long that I actually didn't listen to. I thought about studying naturopathy for ages. I didn't.
How
I was
long
just
did you
like,
think about it?
Oh, I thought about it for at least 3 years and making a career change.
3 years.
Yeah. But I was just really, like stuck in fight or flight. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm just running from minute to minute, really high stressed. And, I didn't listen to the signs. I ended up breaking my foot and I couldn't walk for 4 months. And I was like, this is the sign from the universe that I need.
Breaking your foot, that's hilarious.
But it's so key. Like, I think sometimes if we don't listen to our body and slow down and listen to like the messages of our inner being and our inner knowing, life forces us to change and it's not convenient. I was like, I can't do hairdressing anymore. And I've always felt this way. So started studying naturopathy, had babies at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty full on, but it was
is.
just such a key passion of mine. I find it really interesting.
That's so awesome. So you just like need to help other people and felt like you weren't getting to the root cause.
No, yeah. It was
so
a bit
lovely.
like superficial.
Such an empath thing to say.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Don't be scared to get your kid blood tested. A lot of people avoid it, but it shows us so many things we need to see, like vitamin D and B12 and folate, which we can't get from a heavy metal test.
Yeah.
And I'm a hair test that shows us nutrient deficiencies. And if you have tried removing sugar and gluten from your child's diet and they're eating good quality fish and they've still got anxiety, then see us in the clinic because that means there's other internal factors going on, especially if you've already started regulating those external factors as well.
Yeah.
There's a reason that they'd be like that, and it's likely because they're not absorbing nutrients of what you're giving them because of gut lining or they've got the MTHFR.
Yeah, I find that those genetic key things are different. But just with the blood test as well, if you're touching base with a naturopath and we're in clinic, we've obviously done some baseline things and we can get you to where you need to be with the most indicated blood test that you're going to get. So you're not just going to go get one and get no information from it. We can really guide you into what we're looking for, why we're looking for
it. And I think a lot of times that people be like, oh, I've done everything. I went to the GP and they said all my child's bloods were fine, all my bloods were fine. But a lot of times not even testing what's actually required to be testing. Like how are you meant to know if you're not nutrient deficient if not all the nutrients have been tested, like you haven't tested B12 and folate. So how do you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's good to remember that just because everything's been checked doesn't mean everything's actually been tested to be checked as well.
I agree.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I hope you guys all liked our session today, and I'm going to have Bonny join us for one more session, which will be released soon. Thank you all for joining us, and if you have any questions that you want us to answer in the podcast, leave them in our Spotify link below. And thank you for joining us. May your health be natural and your days be balanced.